All right, welcome back to the Lindroth Hockey Podcast. We're in partnership with Black and Gold Hockey Productions. You're here with today co-host father and son duo, Andrew and Jim Lindroth. Dad, how you doing today?
Doing great, Andrew, and welcome back. Andrew just came back from his 26th birthday, celebrating with all his buddies out in Vegas.
Yep.
Did you get to Circa and see Banks?
I didn't see Darren Banks again. He was out of town, but he was there the day before I got there. But we got to see him last year. It was fun. So, but Dad, we got an awesome guest today. Speaking of Darren Banks, we do have another former Bruin on the show today. And so today we're excited to have with us today Matt Lashoff. So Matt began playing for his high school prep team, and then in 2002 joined the U.S. national team to develop for the year, and then eventually went on to be drafted in the OHL by the Kitchener Rangers in 2003. Matt played the 3 full years in the OHL, and during that time went on to be drafted by the Boston Bruins in the first round of the 2005 NHL draft. The hard-nosed defenseman went on to play his first pro games with Providence Bruins in the AHL, and then began his pro hockey journey from there. His full-time pro hockey work started in 2006 and played between the Boston Bruins club in Providence from 2006 to 2009 before being traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning eventually. After moving to the Sunshine State, Matt played with the organization for parts of 2 years before spending his final year in North America with the Toronto Maple Leafs organization until 2012. From there, Matt took his talents overseas until 2015 and later returned to North America, finishing his career playing between the AHL and occasionally going back overseas until 2017, which is when I believe Matt decided to hang up the skates. I know that sounds like an elite prospect, so your mother made that intro for you, Matt, but without further ado, we'll welcome Matt Lashoff today. How you doing, my man?
Doing good, guys. Yeah, and that is the definition of a suitcase right there, right?
Well, Matt, let's start from the beginning, man. Obviously, you know, like we just mentioned, you played for your high school before joining the U17 U.S. national team as well. Talk to us a bit about what it was like to represent your country at such a young age and how it helped you prep to join the OHL after you were drafted.
Yeah, it was an interesting case. I mean, you know, I was part of a group of kids that around that time were getting recruited to colleges really, really young. So I actually ended up kind of even backstory on that further. I committed to Boston University when I was like 13 years old. Yeah, it's just, the sound mind of a 13, 14-year-old, right, at that point. So that kind of was the trajectory, and I loved my time at Avon. It's a fantastic school. I mean, the people there were great. We had a really good team there as well. We had a couple guys who ended up playing. Jonathan Quick was there. Kid Sean Backman was there as well, played pro for a while. So we had a really good group, and all those kids I had grown up with playing kind of youth hockey wise, and really the gold standard at that point was to go to the US program, right? Like that was kind of the thing everybody wanted to do at that age level, because it was really the kind of the best of the best, and it was an amazing experience. I mean, I think it really taught you to be a pro probably earlier than you probably could have there, and then you're obviously getting you're getting access into the international competition and kind of representing the country, which is amazing. But I think that one of the cooler parts about it for me is that you were playing the way that the team is kind of built out, and I think they're still doing it now. It was a little different at the time because they had the North American Hockey League and the USHL were a little bit separated. But we were playing kids, who were arguably 3-4 years older than us at the time, right? And then you're playing some college teams, and then you're going to school full time, and you're learning how to train the correct way. So it was really a gauntlet of information and kind of learning how to be a player very, very earlier, and the seriousness that you needed to take it. So it was an awesome experience. The program has done amazing things, and obviously put a lot of guys through professional ranks and high-end college ranks and whatnot. But I think when you look back at those times, they really do create good people and really create a foundation for you to move forward playing wise too, which is great.
So then what led to your decision to do competitive junior hockey over Boston University?
Yeah, that was a tough one. That was a tough one. That was probably the toughest decision that I had made, maybe even to date. I mean, like, I had an amazing coach that was there in Jack Parker at BU. I had developed a relationship with him there. David Quinn was actually our coach at the US program at the time too, and he ended up kind of moving on to be the assistant at Boston University. And for me, I didn't have a great year at the US program. Like, it was a bit of an up and down year for me. And I felt that, my style of game at the time was going to be, if I was going to try to do what I wanted to do, I needed to have a breakout year and kind of bet on myself, so to speak, right? And it was a really difficult decision, and Bobby Orr was my agent at the time. And I respect Bobby obviously to the end of time, but I mean, this really proved to me even further so how great of a human being he was. I mean, I'm 15, 16 years old at the time, trying to make a decision from a family in my background. My parents never went to 4-year school. You got an opportunity to go to free college at one of the best universities in the world. And you're looking at the opposite spectrum of that is let's go be a quote unquote professional hockey player at 17 with nothing kind of in the future around that. So I talked to Bobby every day for weeks on end about this, and ultimately felt that the decision to go to Kitchener, I was actually drafted by the Sioux, and then my rights were traded, while I was at the U.S. program, because a bunch of stuff ended up happening there. So once I got traded to Kitchener, I hadn't really thought about it at that time, but once that happened, I went up and watched a game. They were playing the Plymouth Whalers in the Western Conference Finals in the Ontario League at the time, and it was like, I mean, they had, I think, 15 guys between both teams that played in the NHL, like very, very high end players. The arena was packed. I was like, this is what I want to do. And it ultimately ended up being a great decision for me. I kind of had a breakout year that first year in Kitchener, and then was able to kind of, wrangle myself back up to where I felt I should have been. And then that kind of catapulted into the pro style stuff and the opportunity to get drafted and go from there. But it was definitely a tough decision.
Was there a tough transition for you you're playing highly competitive U.S. hockey, obviously, but then you go into the OHL. It's a little bit of different beast. I'm sure billet family situations, trying to do all those things. Was it a tough transition, or was it easy for you?
The toughest transition for me, I think, was probably Avon to the U.S. program, right? I mean, because at Avon, I was still somewhat close to home. I was really young. I mean, I was 14 years old leaving home, right? So it was being able to go home on the weekends at Avon wasn't too bad, but then going to the U.S. program, that was a difficult transition, right? It's your first time away from home at 15, in 15, 16. So it was that part was difficult. Going to Kitchener was kind of a light bulb moment for me, right? Like, I was in a situation where I was like, all right, like you're jumping into the deep end here, like it's put up or shut up, right? And I think the fear for an American kid going up there at the time, I think I was one of the first guys that basically built into your quote unquote contract that if I shit the bed, so to speak, and doesn't work out, I can always fall back and they're going to pay for your schooling that would have been there otherwise, right? Which was a very innovative thing to do at the time, right? Now there's a whole bunch of clauses and pitfalls in that nobody really wants to talk about, but it's which is kind of come to fruition as of now. But going to Kitchener was a great moment for me. Like, and Peter DeBoer and Steve Spott were the coaches there, and they put a lot of trust in me. That they made me feel at home. They made me, I felt like I could finally kind of be the player that I thought that I could be, and they were heavily in molding some of those other pieces there. But I didn't find the transition from the U.S. program to Kitchener was that difficult as far as like a lifestyle. It's a different style of hockey, but I think to me it lended itself a little bit better to the way that I was playing. And I think I got lucky too, just with regards to the group that was there. We had some really good other players. I mean, like, Mike Richards was there, David Clarkson. We had a kid, Andre Benoit, was a defenseman, was a really older guy who was great. Jakob Kindle was there, Boris Valabik, Mark Fraser. Like, we had a really good group of guys that were there that I kind of felt seamlessly fit in right away, which was good.
So if I read this correctly, you're finishing in Kitchener, and then you actually get a taste of the American League, where you play some games with Providence as you finish with Kitchener. What was that sudden transition like? I mean, now it's junior hockey, but now it's grown men, families to provide for. I mean, this is real stuff. Was that a hard transition?
Yeah, yes and no. Like, I think that that piece of it, to be able to play at the end of the year especially in Providence at the time, like the Bruins were in a very tumultuous situation, right? I mean, it was at the time where, the team was turning over, new people were coming in. And because of that, there was a lot of young players all kind of at the same age level that were coming into the team at the same time, right? So, and there was a really good core of older veteran American Hockey League guys that were there, right? So the transition was difficult as far as, okay, kind of to your point, like, this is another level of hockey. The intensity levels there. The Bruins, we were pretty good that year too, so they were, making a push into the playoffs at that time. So that's a different kind of level of competition at that point in the American Hockey League. And I've always said, like, when you go to the finals in the American League, like that's pretty much like NHL regular season hockey, right? Like, I mean, you're about as close as you possibly can get with that. So the hockey level was definitely, ramping up. But I think from a holistic perspective, the transition wasn't all that difficult because we had so many good young guys that we could rely on and lean on. I mean, like Mark Stewart was there, Chris Versteeg, we had some really good guys that we kind of bound together with. And Jay Leach, who was amazing, was the captain of the team at that time. I actually known Jay since I was a kid. He's from right outside my hometown. So that helped a lot too, because he'd been bullying me around since I was about 7. So that was easy. But it was good. I mean, I think the intensity level and the seriousness is obviously just another ratchet level up, right? I mean, it's a different mindset from junior hockey for sure. I mean, to your point, I'll never forget Don Sweeney. He pulled me in the office the first couple of years, and he's like, basically to your point, right? He goes, why do you think you're going to win a battle here in the corner? So I'm fast, I'm tough, and because I want it more, right? He goes, well, the difference between you going into that corner and let's say this other guy going in there in the corner is that if he doesn't come out with the puck, that's food he's costing his kids on the table for, right? So I was like, all right, that's a pretty good good analogy there, my friend. So very cool kind of perspective shift early on for sure.
So I don't want to get sidetracked, but I can't let, since we have so many Boston listeners, you just mentioned the name Bobby Orr, they'll be like, why did you ask a question? So I want to tie this into sort of the business, hockey business with Orr, but with your career. So what is it like? I mean, you get drafted in the first round. We'll go over that in a minute, but OHL, outstanding. You're starting to play, get your feet wet in the American League before you're drafted. You got Bobby Orr or whoever is your agent. What's the type of pressure on you? What's the relationship with the agent at this point? Is he or she pulling for, calling the GM saying, hey, don't forget our boy and the draft coming up? What give us sort of what goes on behind the scenes when you've got a high prospect like you with an agent? We have no idea. We've never asked this question.
Yeah, so you're talking kind of like before the draft happens type of deal?
Yeah.
Like
You're finishing in Kitchener, right? I mean, is your agent like, don't suck, this is the most important time of your life? Or, is it not mentioned?
No, you know what? One of the reasons that I ended up going with Bobby at the time was kind of correlated to this question, right? I mean, the way he carries himself, obviously there's this cachet with his hockey career and what he's been able to accomplish both on the ice and off the ice, and the kind of embattlement, with Eagleson and all these things, kind of that character piece that was there that you kind of felt, you knew that he was going to have your back and your best interest, right? And I think taking away how great all those things are that he was able to accomplish on the ice, he is a far better individual than all of those accolades put together, right? Like there's just something very honest and very true about his nature, which gives you a big sense of comfortability around kind of how things are going to progress. And to your question, he was a very he is a very kind of not necessarily standoffish, but it's, hey, you do your thing, right? Like there's not a lot of touch basing and, unless you need it. He's very kind of aware of, certain guys need certain things, right? And I was never a guy that was, calling agents every week and trying to figure out, like, bitching and moaning about a weekend or playing time and all that stuff. But that was also kind of the culture that I had grown up in within the game, right? That wasn't really it was kind of a badge of honor to not call your agent kind of deal, right?
Yeah.
And then as it gets closer to the draft, like, they're usually pretty standoffish within the season unless there's some things that are needed or some scenarios that are happening. But as the draft gets a little bit closer, you are kind of talking and they're coordinating kind of how because you have the combine, right, where everybody kind of goes up and does the pre-draft meetings with all these other extra teams. And then there's also some supplementary things that teams do as well. So they'll fly in a couple players and, have them go do an extra meeting or an extra workout and all that kind of stuff. So they're very good at coordinating that. And that's where you start getting into the weeds a little bit more upon, what teams are thinking and where they think would be a good fit and where they think you're going to land in and around. And I had a pretty good feeling that I was going to end up in the first round, and frankly, I thought that I was going to end up with the Devils at the time. I had 3 or 4 meetings with them. They chose right after the Bruins, and there's a funny story about that, which I'll tell later. But they're very good at, if you have a good agent, they're very good at kind of tempering a lot of these expectations. As much as they're working for you, I feel like the job of an agent is they're glorified psychologists. They're really trying to make sure that you're not losing your shit and that things are kind of, on point. And then when you get into your career, they're trying to figure out kind of best scenarios for you to be at, and obviously kind of those contract metrics that come in. But, with regards to the business end of it early on, there's only so much that they can do. I'm sure there's some finagling behind the scenes and kind of talking about, a lot of it is character based at that point, right? Like, they've seen us almost too much at that point, right? So they're really, a lot of the scouts now, a bunch of my friends in management and stuff now, I mean, the amount of calls you get more on a guy's character farly outweigh what you think about what they are as a player too. So there's a lot of that stuff going on as well.
So obviously my dad mentioned you got drafted in the first round, which we haven't had too many people that have been drafted in the first round on the show before. First of all, we like to ask, what is your draft story? Obviously, you were there. I don't even know where the draft was held in 2005, but you were there. I still think that was during your Kitchener Rangers times. I think that was before you played for Providence. And then you talked about you had meetings with other teams other than the Devils as well. Was there another team? Like, does anybody ever tell you, like, was there another team that would say, hey, we plan on drafting you? Did the Bruins have a conversation with you? Did you have an idea the Bruins wanted to sign you? I mean, Bobby Orr was your agent, right? So is there any correlation there or anything like that?
Yeah, the draft was very interesting that year, and I had the amazing fortune of nailing 2 lockouts in the course of a 13-year career, which is always humanly possible, right? So the first entry into that was actually out of the lockout, right? So my draft was much different than most, right? So we had our draft held in Ottawa, but it was a scaled down version of the draft time. So they only brought, I think it was 20, it might have been 30 guys. Like, it might have been like on the nose, the amount of picks for the first round or whatnot, right? So you had a pretty good idea that you were going to go in the first round when they asked you to come to the draft. And strangely enough, there were a couple guys who ended up not going in that first round and had to wait, the extra day and were up there. But it was weird, right? Because it was Crosby's draft, so there was a lot of hoopla around that whole situation. It was not in the arena; it was held in a conference room at a hotel there. So it was a very strange dynamic, very, very nerve-wracking. For sure. I mean, for myself, I had known. I mean, you always think where things are going to kind of land, but you really don't, right? Like, it really is up in the air. Outside of Sid, everyone else is kind of pooping themselves, going like, I have really no clue where this could go. Even your second 2, 3, 4 guys, right? Like, there's conversations to be had, but you never know what's going to happen, and trades and things that happen kind of that night before. And that whole weekend is a very big kind of management, kumbaya, where a lot of stuff happens, right? So, I had a really good feeling that I was going to end up going to the Devils or the Rangers at the time. And what ended up screwing things up is that Mark Stahl, who was supposed to go kind of top 10 at the time, ended up dropping to what I think was 15, where the Rangers were. And it kind of threw all of these D-men that were in the draft kind of all over the place, right? So I ended up going, so I was kind of in that rating from basically like 15 to, 30, basically right at the end of the first round. And I think even a couple people had me in the second round or whatever. At that time, you try not to look at that shit because you can like legit drive yourself crazy.
Right.
And it's at the time where you're not playing, right? So like all you're doing is like working out and going back and like looking at this and where am I going to go and what's going to happen and who do I know and all this stuff. But the funny story about the Bruins, and I had actually had a very, very intense meeting with them during the combine. Like they were, grilling you about everything, under the sun, like very stern-faced group. Like I'm like, shit, well, that didn't go well. I'm not going to go there.
So what does, let me ask you this, because I wanted to ask this. What does a conversation that act like? I mean, what do they want to know? Like, yeah, a big defenseman, tough. I show up to practice on time. I work really hard. Like,
Yeah, what questions did they ask?
What more could you do?
Well, if they get into the weeds, man, and they'll and it's a lot like we were talking about earlier, right? It's a lot about personality and a lot about how you're going to react to certain situations, right? So a lot they'll come up with questions like, "Hey, in December you were a -3 in this game. Like, what the hell happened?" And you're like, "What the?"
Game 56. I don't know.
Yeah, like I'm like, I don't even remember like last Tuesday, guys. Like, what are you talking about? Like, so it's a lot of stuff like that. There's a lot of kind of these catching questions that they'll ask, just to see how you're going to react, right? Like, hey, we heard you're a booze bag, like, how do you, what's the deal with that? And you're like, well, where the hell did that come from? Like, no. Like, and it's not anything real directed towards any of these questions. It's really to kind of see, all right, how is he going to react? How is he going to deal under a pressure situation and all that kind of stuff? And I think, there's a lot of talk nowadays about agents and these people kind of preparing the guys to go into the draft. And I think I never had that, right? It was like Bobby and the group were like, just go be yourself, right? Because there's no scripted answer that you can give that's going to be better than just being your own person in this stuff, right? And I think, hockey is archaic and it's embodiment just on how the guys, talk to the media and how like kind of introverted in a sense that they are. But it's because of the culture of that locker room, right? And I think that we're programmed in a way to be team first and not self first, right? And just in its nature. And a lot of the questions are stuck to the opposite spectrum of that, right? To see how you are going to handle those situations and to see how you're going to be pressure tested under these certain situations. And you'll have some groups will go in and they'll have like 2 guys there, 3 guys there, GM, assistant GM, and maybe the coach or something. Like I remember the Bruins had like 17 people. So you're sitting at the end of this table and it's like every scout, all the GMs, player development, like all these guys, and you're kind of like, holy shit, okay, here we go. So they do get into the weeds pretty big,
It's like a deposition, but you don't have an attorney.
Yeah, exactly. But and you know what? Like, I think that kind of to that point, right? Like you've got some of these teams which are, they come in and have very casual conversations, and it's like, what do you like outside of hockey? Like, do you think you're gonna get into hockey when you're done playing? Like stuff like that. Like, how much does the guy love the game? Like all that kind of thing, right? Like, what are you doing on your off days? Like all that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting psychological mechanic for sure.
So obviously when you turn first year pro, you end up eventually getting the call up to the NHL. The Bruins desperately needed a good puck moving defenseman. So kind of a 2-part question. We want to go through your experience, first getting into the Bruins locker room, all that. But in today's day, and I know the draft has always been big, but of course the drafts now are even more hyped, and the first round draft picks. And we're seeing evidence now with, even Lafreniere a few years ago. You have Shane Wright this year, of this pressure of your first round draft pick. And I know not all first rounders immediately go up to the NHL, but it's that pressure of we need to get a return on our investment. And then the kids are not playing. They're playing 6-7 minutes at a time. So when you were called up, was there a lot of pressure, especially in a market like Boston, to where you have to perform? You're a first round draft pick. You have to save the Bruins, So what was that like first before we get into your first game and that first moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was definitely a lot of that. And I think, a lot was going on with the Bruins at that time too, right? I mean, that was right around the time, Joe got traded and they brought in all these guys, and there was a massive kind of shift that was happening, which was really kind of put myself in a difficult position. Because if you look at it, even in all three teams that two of the three teams that I went in, the entire organization got overhauled within a year from me being there, right? So a completely new group of people that for the Bruins that drafted me and that was there. And then in Tampa, same thing. I mean, everything from an ownership change to the whole gamut was gone in that situation. So there's definitely, you felt the pressure, you felt the shift. I mean, Boston is one of the most amazing sports communities there is. Massively, as you guys know, passionate fan base. I mean, which is the best part about playing there, right? But there is an extra stress test on that, and being kind of the first round guy, especially on defense, which was a bit of a gap in their hull at that point. There definitely was some pressure internally and externally going in. I thankfully I had a little bit of Kessel taking some of the heat on that, because it was his first year too, so he was able to take a little bit of that heat, and had a great kind of first year. But for me, it was interesting, right? I mean, I think it was a frustrating balance, I think, for the team and myself, because I had a really good start to the season in Providence. Was having some success down there. Granted, we had a very, very good team down there as well. Kind of all the guys who are still, there now, or at the same space in their careers as I was at that time, right? Your Marchand, Krejci, all those guys, right? I mean, Marshy came a little bit later, but Krejci at the same time, and Tuukka Rask and all these guys were all down there. So we had a good group of guys, but having that success going up, and then having some success in Boston immediately over those first, 6 or 7 games, it really became a balance for the team too, because we were not playing well. Like, the team was not doing well, but I was kind of holding my own and had a good first gauntlet at it, a good first dozen games or 10 games or so. And the team had to make a decision upon, all right, what do we want to do? Do we want to keep them up here in this, shit show, which is essentially what it was that year? Or do we want to send them back down and kind of get that seasoning? And now, being older and a little bit smarter, that really was kind of a tipping point for me, right? It was a big smack and realization of holy shit, even, I felt like I was playing pretty well. You're having good conversations with the coaches. Different league at the time then than it is now, as far as the leash on the young guys, for sure. But it was a difficult thing for me to process. That was the first thing where I was like, shit, I'm playing well down here, I'm playing well up there right now, but this extra thing was the catalyst to push you down and kind of stay down there and figure it out the rest of the year. And it was a similar situation the year after, right? I mean, the Bruins were in this kind of model where, which was kind of traversing into the right direction, but they wanted a certain type of player, right? They wanted, a Mark Stewart at the time, a Brad Stewart at the time. He's kind of simple, hard-nosed defenseman, which I was at the time, a little bit more offensive grained at the moment, right? A little bit more risk for reward. And, if it was today's game, I think things are a little bit different, right? The leash is a little bit longer. And ultimately, you kind of fall out of favor with the guys who were there. It's a new group that's in. Claude Julien was not a long leash for a young guy individual at that time. Well, I don't think ever was for that fact. So it was a tough balance, right? I mean, you're having some success down in the minors, you're having some success in the NHL, but it's in these kind of bite-sized moments, and then that was probably the most difficult path of it, right? Is trying to kind of find your footing, find who you are as a player, fit into the mold of what they want, and continuing to find a place to play on a day-to-day basis in that league.
So a few years later, you move on to Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
You move on to Tampa. Was this more of probably what you were just saying or said early when you're dealing with your agent, finding the best place for you? Because that's really what it's all about. It's your career. You've got to make the money. You've got to do what you need to do in your career, what's best for you. Was it that, or was it out of the blue, holy shit, I got traded to the Tampa?
I definitely sensed it at that time, right? I mean, I think kind of to what we were talking about earlier, right? It was a different vision. It was a different group than what had drafted me. You look at the players who ended up kind of taking that leap over myself at the time, which was, it was Mark Stewart, it was Matt Hunwick, it was Johnny Boychuk, right? Like very similar style players in their nature, right? And so at that time, I was up. I think the last year that I was there, I was up for pretty much the entire year. I had a little bit of a snip in the minors, but I was up, but I wasn't playing, right? Like I was up and I was in practice. I was healthy scratched all the time. And I had in Donnie Sweeney we became very close because he was the player development guy at the time. So I was talking to him all the time about this stuff and, hey, what else do I got to do? And, and whatnot. And you could tell, in a sense, he felt bad because I think that there was some situational aspects that garnered a little bit of an extra sniff at certain times, but the team was also going in a very good direction too. So it's pro sports, right? You kind of get caught in the whirlwind of what's happening. So I felt something was going to happen. I think looking back, I think my hope was that it would have been in the summertime where you kind of get a little bit of a regroup. I really love the team. I love the entirety of the organization. I mean, I've been there since I was 18. So you get to know people. It does become home. I mean, it's very close to my hometown, right? So it's like there's a lot of different pieces in there that hurt when you're gone. And but I did feel something was coming. Like I felt that it was either going to be at the trade deadline or at the draft that I was probably going to get moved on at that point, right? So, which I was excited about, right? The writing was a little bit on the wall, and you're kind of seeing what's coming, and and you want the best for those guys, and thankfully, I think from the Bruins perspective, you're able to get a decent return from, me and who was Marty Parsons at the time too, and bringing in, Mark Recchi, which is, a pretty solid pickup by the gang, right? So I felt it was coming. I felt I needed a fresh air, a breath of fresh air. But it's interesting too, somebody told me this when I was playing, or it might have been even just recently, actually, after I was playing. There's a very different dynamic that happens once you're with the team, you're drafted by that team, you're kind of part of that family. And then when you get traded, you are just another player, right? Like you are, and you see that with the players nowadays, right? Like even like a guy in Boston, like a Charlie McAvoy, like there's a different kind of thing about him because he's their guy, right? Like he's a Boston guy drafted by them. It's like one of your kids kind of thing, right? Like he goes to another team, there's like this totally different mentality on it, right? So, and there was definitely a shift there. And, Tampa I basically went from, shit show to coming out of that shit show in Boston to like complete shit show in Tampa, right? Like, so you had ownership problems, you had like everything you could possibly imagine going on down there. And, thankfully I was able to get down and I had some success there early, which was good. And then same thing. I mean, it was I'll never forget this. I was going into camp that the second year, I'd put up some points at the end of that year, which is, listen, I mean, it's not too difficult to put up some points when you're passing the puck to Stammer and Vinny LeCavalier and Marty St. Louis on the power play, right? I mean, that's fairly easy to get a couple assists on doing that. But I did have some success there. And then you walk into training camp the next year and talk about the agency conversations, right? I mean, my agent called me at the time and he's like, hey, he's like, I don't like to talk to guys during camp, but I will tell you, like, at this point, depending on which way this goes, there was an ownership embattlement going on. Like one guy's going to be the GM or the other guy's going to be the GM, and one of them don't like it. So like you might be going down depending on how this happens. And he's like, so, just trust the process and, kind of work through it. And I'm like, holy shit. Okay. And then, the one guy ended up not winning that battle. The guy who liked me ended up going to Toronto and I got traded there and a couple months later. So it's a bit of a shit show. Yeah.
So who was the coach in Tampa? Was it Demers when you were there? I'm just trying to off the top of my head.
Barry Melrose was there when I first got traded, and then
but he was there like a week, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, it was like 3/4 of the season, and then who ended up taking over was Mike Sullivan and Rick Tocchet.
Okay.
Yeah, so those guys were there at the time. Obviously, they were great. It was interesting because it was Tocc's first year. He got named the head coach. And Mike was the assistant, and it was a different dynamic, right? Because Mike he was actually the head coach in Boston when I was there. So I had known Mike for a while, and it had a decent rapport with him, and same thing, like he was embattled with the Bruins and what was going on in that, and then gone. But it was Talk's kind of first trajectory into the head coaching thing, and Mike is amazing, right? I mean, and obviously you can tell that those two had a really good relationship that kind of transferred itself to Pittsburgh later on. But yeah, it was crazy. Tampa was a crazy hot minute for sure.
Yeah, so I'm curious, just getting to the mind of a professional hockey player, really humanizing you guys. When you're getting traded, and no, not to call out any teams, but if I was a professional player, I don't think I'd be very excited to go to the Arizona Coyotes or the Winnipeg Jets, given the locker room situation or just the whole ownership thing. So when you're going to a Tampa, Toronto as a professional player, do you talk to your agent? Do you say is this gonna suck? Do you have that mindset? Or are you just ready for the fresh start and whatever it brings? I mean, I'm curious of what the guys think. You guys are professionals. I know you'll just go there, do your job, but there's got to be some sort of something in you that goes, man, this is going to be rough. Or was it not?
I would say that's kind of it falls in a couple different buckets, right? Like I think from a player's like myself's perspective, right? Like I'm trying to kind of embattle myself as a quote unquote continuous day-to-day player in the league, right? So looking at kind of those ancillary factors wasn't really top of my docket, right? It was more situational. Who are the players that are there what's their depth chart look like who's coming up, who'd they draft in the last little bit? And obviously with being an up and down guy at times, you want to know what their minor league system is like. What's that team like? Because you look at the teams now that are having success, and it really is built on that minor league system, right? It's a winning culture. You're learning how to win. They've got good older guys, and that teaches the younger guys how to continuously kind of push the needle up. And then there's the other bucket where you're a completely profound, day in and day out successful NHL player that are looking at that bucket that you just mentioned, right? It's ownership, like how stable is the ownership? What's the coaching situation like? What are what are those other players' contract statuses look like? Like how long are those guys going to be there? Because if you're choosing to go to a team to go play with a certain guy and he's a free agent in 2 years, and you got to wiggle around where your contract is and he could be gone, and then you're stuck there kind of standing in the middle with it. There's a lot of kind of those extra ancillary conversations that end up happening regarding a trade, which is why you're kind of seeing now, a lot of these no move clauses, selective move clauses in some of these contracts that are happening. It's more so, yes, I think everybody looks at, they want to play in good places and good facilities and good cities, but it's also, what are these teams, where are they kind of mapping out to be in another couple of years? Because it's like the McDavid story, right? You want to go and play in Edmonton for a couple of years with McDavid because you're going to get paid, and you can pretty much go anywhere else you're going to play after that. So you're kind of looking at a lot of those other ancillary situations to try to figure out kind of where you're going to be able to be lockstep. And at the end of the day, depending on who you are, there's not a whole lot of options in your trade status, right? If you're a player without any of those kind of tags on your ticket, you could go anywhere, right? And I think that you're going to see a lot of that happening here with regards to the Arizona situation coming up, and kind of how that shakes itself out, right? I mean, there's a lot that's going to happen here in the next couple of months with regards to the referendum that's happening, and that's going to put a lot of different guys in a lot of different scenarios here, because it's right before the deadline. So it's going to be interesting to see how it maps out for sure.
So we kind of got off of our game. We got too tied up talking about the draft, even though it was a great story.
Right.
But, we're starting to run low on time, and we've got our lightning round we want to hit Matt with. But let's do this. So after the Toronto organization, we've seen it. We've talked to many players that have played NHL in the American League. You take yourself overseas. Now you're playing in the Swedish Elite League. You're playing in the German Dell, their Elite League. You're also doing some KHL, and we've had on multiple players and heard multiple different stories about the KHL, which is arguably the second best league in the world. Do you have any crazy stories? And the reason why we ask, we had somebody that just played there a few years ago, but then we talked to old, I shouldn't say old because he'll call me and yell at me. Linger,
David Ling.
Yeah, David Ling. He went over there when Americans first started going over there, early 2000s, and he was telling horror stories of, hitman being robbed, hiring bodyguards, being paid in cash, all sorts of weird stuff.
Now you went way later, Matt, so I'd imagine maybe it was cleaned up, but Russia's pretty crazy. We could say that.
No, I would say every one of those things that you just mentioned, I had some access to, which is so, it was Russia is Russia. It is it's a fascinating place. I played in arguably one of the worst places over there in a place called Novokuznetsk. It's in the middle of Siberia. The team's not in the league anymore. Interestingly enough, though, Kirill Kaprizov and Ilya Sorokin were on that team. They were 17 years old at the time. So it was the draft age is a little bit different over there, so that you come in a little bit younger. So we were, the worst team in the league at the time. So I had the first overall pick, which ended up being Capriz. And, the stories over there, I think going into it, you look at it and you hear all of those things that you just mentioned, and you're like, well, it can't be that bad. It's like, it's just, this is humanity we're dealing with, right? And then you get over there and you're like, holy shit, it's that fucking bad. Like, it's crazy.
So if you're in Siberia, how long is it to get to a game by plane? The next place you got to go? Yeah,
so the closest plane flight, I believe, the closest city was Novosibirsk and Omsk. So that was where Yager was playing that year. And you're talking a 4-hour plane ride is the closest that you are. It's basically going from, I think it'd be like almost like LA to like Minnesota. And that's like the closest that you are, right? It's like, the league is crazy. Yes. I mean, we had, I was getting paid in cash. They've got a bonus system over there where you get a paper bag after each game, and a little bit of
the Danbury Trashers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's $1,000 per point per game. We didn't win a lot of games, so but and I'll never forget this. There's one game we were getting paid over there. And I come in and my doggy bag is a little bit light. I'm like, hey, did you guys get paid here? Like, even they're like, yeah, we got the full amount or whatever it was at the time. And so I'm walking in the hallway to like the team services guy, and I'm like, hey, my doggy bag is a little bit light here. He stops in his tracks. Looks me dead in the eye. He goes, yes, because you shit tonight. And we won. And I'm like, oh, fuck. So, between that and I had, at the end of my time there, I was negotiating a buyout because I wanted to come back and be at home. So my situation going over there is I've got 3 kids now. At the time I had, before the season started, I had my son, and my daughter was going to be born while I was over there. My wife made a brilliant decision to say that she wasn't going to have the baby in Russia. So we'll give her kudos on that. So she stayed here during that. So I had to build into my contract that I was going to come home I could come home for the birth of my daughter. And I'm like rolling the dice on this and trying to get back at the right time. And granted, like the Russian training camps are insane. Like they are like nothing I've ever seen before. It's like a month-long gauntlet of like physical and mental abuse on your body and on your mind, from like starting at 5 a.m. and not ending till like 11 o'clock at night. Like it's absolutely outrageous. Like 4 or 5 workouts a day, pool swimming, 2 practices, running. Like it's outrageous. So I'm like, I'm looking at these guys and they're doing okay. Like they're kind of surviving this, and I'm like literally ready to die. I'm like, holy shit, like how did these guys looking okay? So I come around the corner in the locker room, and there's a lineup of guys going into the training room. I'm like, what the fuck are they doing in there? Like, and so you hear all the stories about this Russian gas and like all this stuff. So that's what they were doing. They were getting the gas. They had a lineup of pills on the thing, all in Russian. And I'm like, well, fuck it. They look like they're doing great. So I might as well start having a couple of these little niblets here. So yeah, it was crazy. But at the end of my time, so kind of getting back to the beginning of why I started off on that story is, I knew I wanted to get back home, and the season it ends early over there than it does here. So I had an opportunity to come back to the American League to finish the season off and be a little closer to family, play a little more hockey. And I knew I was kind of coming towards the end at that point. I was going to kind of bounce around in Europe, and maybe if I could kind of land in it as a veteran role in the American League, I'm going to be close to kids and all that kind of stuff. So I'm negotiating this buyout with the Russian team at the time, and my agent at the time just flaked off. Not or just a completely different like European guy flaked off. Couldn't even find them. So the team is trying to figure out what this number is supposed to be. I speak very, very little Russian. And so like, I'm trying to figure out where this number is and get another guy involved. But I can't go to the rink at this time. So I'm locked in my apartment, basically. There's not a whole lot to do over there for like 3 days straight. And at 2 a.m. on a Thursday, I get an absolute rack on the door, and it's 2 officers outside with AKs standing at my door. And I'm like, holy shit. So I jump in and, I'm hiding under the bed like a big, strong guy. And, so I'm like, what the fuck? So the way that the Russian contracts were built out at the time is you had any involvement with the police, you had to pay back your salary, and then they don't have to pay you anything, right? So the general manager of the team had called the police on me for whatever bullshit reason that it was to try to get me arrested, so they could just basically boot me out of the thing. So lo and behold, I went in the next day, and the GM of the team was Valery Zelepukin, who's a great guy. And I'm like, hey, did you call the police on me? And he goes, hey, you not signed contract. And I'm like, okay, well,
I got to get out.
thing over here now because I'm leaving. So I was on a plane pretty quick after that. But I think we could probably have a podcast just about Russian stories in general, because I'm there just being on such a lower end team with all this stuff going on it was insane. It was
so insane. On a hockey perspective, how was the league?
Yeah, the league was great. I mean, it was an awesome time. I had a difficult season. It was hurt, it's very difficult to get, medical attention over there in certain places, right? It's a very different culture, and it's very different from a Moscow and a SKA in St. Petersburg to like where I was, right? I mean, you're talking basically like NHL caliber facilities and, team members and all that kind of stuff to not, and I will just leave it at that. The league was great. I mean, at the time you had, Kovalchuk was over there. Obviously, Kaprizov was, in a really good position. So there was a lot of different moving parts that were over there. But I loved the league. I thought the hockey was amazing. The guys over there really kind of band together as a North American group on every team, which is kind of cool. I really enjoyed that, and it was an amazing experience. I would do it again in a heartbeat, just with the amount of things you learn pretty quickly about yourself and about the game. It was very, very cool.
So having all those crazy experiences, just something fun to ask you. When you start to see, of course, you got the war going on with Russia and everything, and now when Kirill Kaprizov and those players that you mentioned going back home and haven't served their military time yet and everything else, and them trying to trap them there, when you were kind of reading or hearing about that, were you kind of like, yeah, that was almost me when I was probably on the way to the freaking airport going there?
He's
Like,
going to end up in the prison in a penal colony.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you look at the nature of the world right now, and and I got a couple guys I know that are still playing over there, and I'm shocked. And interestingly enough, when I played over there, this was the first time this situation with Ukraine was bubbling up. It was 2014, so they shot a plane out of the air. I don't know if you remember that. They shot a plane out of the air over the Ukraine the day that I was leaving to go to Russia. And so, sitting at the breakfast table, seeing that gives you a little bit of some second thoughts on what you're doing at that point. But it is. It's a crazy country, but the cool thing is they love their hockey. They create some amazing players. I thought one of the most fascinating things that I saw over there is what they do with like the youth programs and whatnot, and what these kids are kind of having access to. Like, they build athletes arguably better than most very young, right? I mean, it's crazy. Like, we had kids it's a mandate for kids over there to be all athletes, no matter what sport you're in, to be in gymnastics till age 10 to learn how to like use your body and stuff. So like some very like esoteric kind of thought processes on sport as a whole, and how they choose guys to go in. There's this whole sporting process that the professional guys have to go through too. Is like, you got to walk on this line, they move your limbs, and they're like, you are a basketball player. Like that's
Wow.
still, they were doing that back in communist Russia, and they're still doing it, in a sense now today, which is very, very interesting.
We're going to finish with lightning round. We're going to put you on the spot. A name, a place. If you've got a story, the time is yours. But we're going to hit you with these questions. You want to start, Andrew?
What was the craziest fan base you got to play for? Pro career, not a OHL, just a pro career.
Craziest fan base. I would have to say Boston. Yeah.
Was Toronto worse? Was Toronto worse?
Toronto's a different animal, right? I think it's like, the fan base is amazing, right? And I think the fan base is great. I think you'd arguably put those two kind of up next to each other. But the arena setup in Toronto is much different than it is in Boston, right? It's or at least at the time it was very, very corporate based, right? And your kind of your lower bowl. So it was a different feel than, a TD Garden when that thing is just blasting, right? I mean, it's a very raucous crowd over there. And then I would also probably put in some of these European clubs over there, like some of these places in Switzerland and in Germany, like the fan base in Mannheim, Germany. I mean, they could give anybody a good push there. I mean, that's one of the coolest entry, situations to an ice rink I've ever been a part of. It's, if you guys have a chance to look that up, check it out. It's like unbelievable. The entire back wall is filled with flags, red, white, and blue flags, and they open up the gate and they're just going ape shit on the other side. It's loud. It's a big building too. It's not like a small, it's like a 15,000 seat building. Like it's an NHL size venue. So, I would put those kind of two on polar opposite leagues, obviously, but like, as far as like craziness and kind of the, the hype, Boston, that in the building, outside of the building, insane, Toronto, obviously the focus, and then Mannheim, with just the, batshit crazy, like soccer-esque fans.
Awesome. Which arena had the worst locker rooms?
Oh my gosh, probably the arena that I played in Russia.
It doesn't sound like a very
Getting
place.
dressed in the hallway.
Yeah. In the NHL, let me think. That's a good question. A lot of them were getting overhauled at the time, which was nice. Well, it was probably Joe Louis because we played an old Joe Louis. It was
Right.
old Joe Louis.
That's cool, though.
It was pretty rough. Yeah.
Yeah. I know it's kind of generic, but our Boston fans will be mad if we don't ask this. Favorite Boston memory during the time, or place to eat, anything. They want to hear something.
Oh, I mean, I love the Italian section over there. Tresca I used to go to because Ray Bork, owned that place. I absolutely love my time in Boston, though. I mean, I don't think I could pick one. I mean, from the second I got there at training camp, just being outside of the city, we used to do this clam bake every year before the season started as a team on the North Shore, and that, like, just being with the guys. And I think this is, when you're done playing, like, those are the things that that are your best memories, right? Like hanging with the guys and stuff like that, the golf tournaments before, kind of being in the room, just sitting there before a game, getting ready to go out. Like, for me, Boston had a special place because that was, I mean, Boston's 2 hours from my house, right? I mean, they're kind of the, they were the NHL team that I watched, them and the Rangers, because that's all I had on television at the time, right? So there's a special kind of piece of Boston for me, both as a city and as a team, and with the group that we had, right? I mean, it was all young guys kind of coming up at the same time, so we had a very special crew there between Boston and Providence that, the NHL guys and the American League guys kind of were coming up at the same, but we were also like, our girlfriends turned wives now are still best friends, and you see them go through to have kids and all that kind of stuff. So there's a bit of a special place for Boston. I don't know. The clam bake was pretty awesome though before the season started. A little lobster boil.
Who is the hardest forward to defend against? Who is someone that was so strong you just had trouble moving them out in front of them?
Oh my gosh. Like sneaky hard guys like a Marian Hossa. I think he's more of like one of these underrated guys who like I remember when my first year when I played against him, and he was never a guy that like you kind of stuck out. Like, but you get on the ice and you're just like, he is a big man and can fly, and he was so skilled. Obviously Yager too. Underestimatingly like, and one of the biggest freaks like off the ice too. Like, I mean, the stories about him kind of going for 3 a.m. runs after a game and, letting the ice out in the middle of the night and the weight vests on and all that stuff. Like, like guys like that are like, and I think, when you watch these guys on TV or you go to the games or whatnot, like underestimatingly large, strong dudes, right? And Hossa and Yager are probably two of those guys. Vinny Lecavalier was like that too, right? Like getting him in the corners and how he used his body and rolling off. But I can't imagine being matched up against McDavid now, like the speed that he generates and kind of through the neutral zone. I was watching a couple games the other night and just like picking the puck up at the top of the circle and you're a D-man trying to gap up on him at the blue line. You're just like, oh fuck.
There's no way. Yeah. Who was the rat in your career?
Oh yeah.
Who was somebody who just got under your skin, you wanted to beat up, couldn't for whatever reason? Who was the rat?
Oh, there was a lot of those. Hey, I had the best rat in my corner, which was Marshy. So that was great. And we had him on our side. We always used to laugh like, oh my God, here he goes again. Like
that's when he was on the fourth line too, with Thornton and Campbell, right?
I mean, you're opening up a whole nother can of worms, but and I'll go down there for a second. Did anybody tell him like, what are you doing? Or did they just like, he's going to do what he's going to do?
Well, of course we told him that and had that question. You have to understand too, like, this is a guy, he's a special dude, man. Like in the minors, we're all like, we're young, right? You're young and dumb and you're trying to figure it out and you're trying to play. And we show up to the rink one day and Marshy's got a brand new Escalade. We're like, where the fuck did you buy that? Like, he's like, oh, I got it down the street from like, whoever. Like, he basically, I think he might have bought, like, there was a for sale sign on this thing in somebody's yard. And he was like, yeah. And he's like, why don't we go? We're going to go to lunch. I'm going to take the guys to lunch. So about 3-4 of us go in and the car smelled like cigarettes. Like I like, and I'm like, I go, did you like smoking darts in here before? And he's like, no, this is what was and I picked it up. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing, man? I'll never forget that white Escalade just smelled like darts. I'm like, why did you buy this thing, dude? Like, but yeah, we always did. Marshy was just it's interesting. Like, he was a very good player, right? In the American League. He was very successful in junior, but I don't think any one of us to a man in that room would have predicted what he has become to this day. It has been one of the most amazing trajectories from a career standpoint. And it goes to show, like, he had all of these intangibles prior to on the right side of the puck and, battling and grinding it out and like all that kind of thing. Very, very smart hockey player. But then he added these elements in over the course of it, and training with Sid, I don't think hurts. That it's just so fun to watch him play now. And I think back to those early days when we were younger, and I'm like, dude, like this guy, he nailed it. Like, he nailed exactly what it takes to become a progressively better player in the NHL and be a massive part of the team. And I think, hitting it at the crossroads of where the game has become too has been really, really fun to watch.
Was it hard to talk to him when he was doing stupid stuff on the ice? You're like, dude, you can't be doing that. Was he just like, leave me alone? I do what I do.
Yeah, he seems like
at that point you're just shaking your head at him because he's just gonna do shit. Like, you're just like, he's poking guys, and he had some tough guys. Like, we had, in the minors, you had a Steve McIntyre, who was arguably one of the toughest guys to ever play. And then up in Boston, you have Thordy, right? So like when he's running around and jabbing guys and doing shit, like he knows somebody's there to help him out, So it's like we're sitting on the bench or on the ice, we're like, holy fuck, all right, Mac, go ahead, go help him out, like, and he loved it, right? And guys like Mac and Thordy, they love that shit, right? Which is good. So
I know that this is the last question. I know it's pretty broad, but just the first thing that pops in your mind when I say favorite memory from your pro hockey career from any point. Was a big
Yeah, I think it goes back to earlier. It's just the guys, right? I mean, I think sitting on the plane and playing cards and sitting on the back of the bus and the long road trips when you're exhausted and kind of banding together and you remember the battles, right? I mean, I think you remember all of the the going in game sevens prior to the game, after the fact, going and licking your wounds and having beers with the guys after and kind of reliving it. And and it's funny. I mean, what I'm doing now, and I'm involved in the game, but on the business side, and I've always said it, and kind of the way we started off the program, talking about being a suitcase, right? It's like, you don't see, you can't map out how the game's going to go. You can't map out how your career is going to go. You can only just kind of put your best foot into it. But at the end of the day, when you're done, you're going to find out how good of a teammate you were while you were there. And that's what's so great about our game, right? It's so team focused. It's so kind of band of brotherhood focused that you're going to learn real quickly when you step away, how many phone calls you're getting and if your phone's going to ring or it's going to stop ringing. And that's the stuff that I look back on. And luckily my phone's still ringing and again, guys still pick up my phone calls, which is great. And, seeing and being at the games and being at the buildings and being around the guys now, it's pretty awesome to be able to bring my kids back and kind of relive some of those moments and all that kind of stuff. But you never forget the battles. You never forget the stories. You never forget all that shit. And I think it always lives with us. I mean, I was just last night at an alumni event here with the St. Louis Blues. I live in St. Louis now. And it's probably and I never played for the Blues, but you talk about an alumni community kind of brought me in like I was one of theirs. And, we skate 3 days a week. We've got these Christmas get-togethers. Our families are all close. And, when you look at it from a broad perspective, my best friends are in this game and they will always be till the end of time. So it's there's nothing like it.
Cool, man.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, we'll say goodbye off air. Hang on a quick sec, but officially, Matt, we can't thank you enough. It's been worth the wait for us. We are appreciative of your time you gave us today.
Thank you, man.
No, my pleasure. Thanks.
Okay, great guy.
Dude, pretty funny too.
So the background is we've been in contact with him. I don't even know how long it's been so
Okay,
long.
we'll say this. It was supposed to be episode 92.
Right.
That was when we were originally supposed to have.
And we're
106.
episode 110 today, I believe. But yeah, it's one of those things like hockey players gracious enough to respond to us however we contact them.
Right.
And then sometimes you get a date set and they're not getting paid to come on our podcast. We don't get paid to do our podcast.
Yeah, they're just being nice.
So they're being gracious with their time. And sometimes they're like, hey boys, I can't do it tomorrow or next week or whatever. And then it gets to those, I'll get in touch with you. And sometimes, we'll send in a little bit of follow-up, but other times it's like you do the follow-up and you just kind of let it go. But Matt's always been, I didn't forget about you guys. So I'm so glad he hung with us and it was really worth it. We probably spent too much time on the draft stuff, Andrew, but I think our listeners, knowing our listener base, they'll appreciate that since most of them are former
Bruins
hockey
fans,
players,
right? Well,
and former hockey players too to hear their stories. But
yeah.
Great guy, well spoken, good looking guy too.
Yeah, good stories too, man.
Good
He's
stories.
Pretty funny guy. So.
Yeah. He lightened up. He started with a little bit of this, and by the end of it, it was he loosened up quite a bit. So great guy.
And all I have to say is, and I can say this because I'm never going to go visit Russia. That place is nuts to go play over there. I don't think I'd ever play over there. Would you?
I almost went there on a trip.
Why?
When I was in high school, remember I was at, listeners know I'm a musician.
Yeah.
And I was in Massachusetts at the New England Conservatory while I was in high school with the Massachusetts Youth Wind Ensemble. And they were going to do a trip. They do a trip every year and they were supposed to go to, I think, like St. Petersburg. And Chernobyl happened.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Really?
It was like 87 or whatever it was. So we didn't go.
It's a good thing you didn't. Or
and, your grandparents, they'd be like, you're not going, even if they were. But that was my one chance, to go to Russia there. So
I just find it funny that there's a place in the world that's still just crazy like that. Mafia ran, just crazy people, crazy Arctic cold people.
Go outside of, this country and you'll, not to get sidetracked. I could tell all about my Central America stories, judging music down there.
Yeah.
But anyway, we will wrap it up, Andrew.
Yes. Good episode, Matt Lashoff. Again, thank you for coming on. We got more guests coming up. We're gonna probably have our.
We got to have Cappy back on.
We
Dave.
will have Cappy back on. 'Cause
Capuano,
The
because-
Bruins are lighting it up. And I got to apologize to Nick Foligno again. We'll do that next episode. So thank you for everybody hanging in there with us today.
Thank you much.